Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And today we're going to talk about a debut novel, the title of which is My Sunshine Away. Words that you might recognize as part of the lyric to an old song, You Are My Sunshine. The author, Emma Walsh, is joining us. His publisher is G.P. Putnam Sons. And thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me.
The book that you've written is, a very different book when you read it. But when you describe it, it sounds like many other books. In one sense, one can say that it's, a coming-of-age story and right. That it's a novel about the South and all those kinds of cliches. But this book was written with a couple of goals in mind, it seems to me. At least you said this at one time. You wanted to delve into the importance of family and memory. You said that I don't mean this in any romantic or New Age sense. I mean that literally, when a topic comes up in conversation, if there's any disagreement, people are too quick to pull out their microphones and get the real answer. They don't spend much time anymore wondering about the past or the world around them. They just go get the data. What they lose in this info grab, I think, is a crucial stretch of time, the wondering time that ultimately comes to define us. What does our memory tell us? How have we arranged the past to please ourselves? And that's a very interesting concept you have there. Where did that come from?
Well, I think it comes mainly just from sitting around and being in conversations with people and talking and trying to have a good time, and then something comes up, and whether it be a disagreement or something that we just can't remember, and just noticing that people just didn't seem that interested in possibly being wrong anymore. Making guesses and going back and thinking about the past and wondering what it might have been. Instead, everyone has instant access to what they consider to be like the real answer, which is what it says on Wikipedia or Google or whatever, and they go get the answer and the conversation ends. And I just kind of found myself missing, the kind of longer conversations where people could just be wildly wrong and about how they remember things, because the way that they were wrong was often like the most interesting thing about them, and that reminded me a lot of kind of family conversations that you'll have with siblings or with your folks or whatever, and y'all remember the same trip to the beach or whatever totally differently, or y'all remember when something happened in your family, you remember it totally differently. And I got interested in that. I guess I've always been interested in that, because I think that, I guess the more I thought about it, my friends tend to describe me as this inexplicable optimist. I feel like I'm a pretty happy person, and I think I look at the world in a pretty optimistic way. Yet, I think I'm pretty aware of all the, of many of the hardships, many of the things that complicate life. But so the more I thought about it, I was like, well, I wonder what I'm doing with my own memories, what we all do with our memories and the way we kind of reshape them and reshuffle them in order to get through our lives the best we know how, and I think that's part of what got me going with this book was that the kind of the plot, arises from a story I overheard growing up about a girl in our neighborhood being attacked, and I grew up in a very similar neighborhood to the one in the novel. So I just started thinking about, isn't that peculiar that the way that I think about my neighborhood and in my childhood is so rosy, where right down the street someone could have having this really nightmarish time. And so I think that kind of got me jumped off on the plot, and I just kind of went from there. And so that's kind of a long way to answer your question.
No. Well, one of the other things is that it seems to me that to think that way, you have to do something else that people are not inclined to do so much these days, and that is slow down. Slow down.
Right.
See what's on the horizon. One of the other purposes of your writing, you said in another place, was to do justice to the overshadowed city of Baton Rouge. That sounds like a Chamber of Commerce statement to me.
Yeah, I was about to say I don't remember saying that exactly, but yeah, that is the town I grew up in, and it's a place I'm really, really fond of, and it's, it's just a place that I don't feel like gets talked about very often, and it's obviously, for many, legitimate reasons, overshadowed by New Orleans and stuff like that, but it's just a place that whenever I sat down and finally, had the tools to write a novel, I very much wanted to set it there, and to talk about the city in ways that I guess I'd always kind of wanted to. And this narrator in this situation gave me an opportunity to do that. So that was a lot of fun for me.
One of the interesting things about the cast is that one of the main characters doesn't have a name. He is narrator, a teenage boy living across the street from a young girl by the name of Lindy, with whom he is totally, obsessively infatuated. And the whole story, this memory of things past, is seen through his eyes many years later. Fascinating way to set it up. Very, very good. And then
I appreciate it. Yeah.
One of the big things is that there's a violent crime in what we might, if you'll forgive the expression, in sleepy Baton Rouge, which is not usual, I guess, is it?
Well, not in the type of neighborhood that they grew up in. They're kind of a suburban neighborhood, in
right?
New. The houses, the street. The families that live there are like the first families that had lived in that neighborhood, basically. One of those types of things, and they all kind of, I think, went there with the idea that they were going to kind of build a haven for their kids, and like a lot of families do. We'll go to a place that we create ourselves in order to be safe, and so I think that the crime that happens when Lindy is 15, really breaks a lot of that apart, because it's a place that they themselves built that's happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, you give us a lot of characters here in this book, and when we return, we're going to look at some of them.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
My Sunshine Away, a novel by M.O. Walsh, published by Putnam & Sons. That's the book we're talking about today. And Garen Strauss, the author of Half a Life and Chang and Ing, says about this book, My Sunshine Away reminds us that art can be wrenching and a delight, that pain, if examined through wit, intimacy, and wisdom, can be a salve. That's Darren Strauss. Very interesting comment. Not so sure.
Very nice, yeah.
Yeah, not so sure I understand it, but I like it.
Well, those are the best kind, yeah.
Yeah, it's a literary gem. And now the suburb of Baton Rouge is disturbed by a rape. And the central plot of the book, at least seemingly central plot, is who did it and why. And the answers are to come, but only by way of memory. That is, they're going to be seen by the narrator as he recalls them, as he grasps them many years later. And it is an understanding of memory, as the author has said in another place, that goes beyond data. And I think that's very, very important to enjoying this book. to understand what's going on. Now, on page 164, do you have the book with you?
No, I can try to find one.
Would you do that, please? I should have asked you to do it before. I'm sorry.
Sure, that's all right. Let's see if I have the same edition here. What are you looking at on 164?
Toward the paragraph second from the bottom, all this to say.
Uh-huh.
Okay?
I got you. I'm with you now. Yep.
Now, one of the important parts about this book is that the narrator's parents, mom and dad, are separated, and dad is no longer a factor, or much of a factor, it seems, in the home. So there is a character who kind of plays his role by the name of Uncle Barry. And this is a very understandable concept for me because that's the way I was raised. I had no father, and I had a lot of uncles. I'd like you to read about Uncle Barry here, all this to say. Can you see that part?
Yeah, sure.
Read that.
You just want me to read that paragraph right there?
Yeah, read it to the end of the chapter.
Okay. Yeah, well, this is just for a little context. This is a moment where he is, the narrator and his Uncle Barry have seen some of the neighbors fighting on the lawn. One of the people involved was the father of the girl who's been raped. And so he's still, after some time, still dealing with it and having a hard time with it. And it starts like this. All this to say that what my Uncle Barry displayed for me that summer was just how strange and complicated adults are. As a kid, you assume you know them because you see them often and because they care for you. But for every adult person you look up to in life, there is, trailing behind them, an invisible chain gang of ghosts, all of which, as a child, you are generously spared from meeting. I know now, however, that these ghosts exist and that other adults can see them. The lost loves, the hurt friends, the dead, they follow their owner forever. Perhaps this is why we feel so crowded around those people who we know have had hard times. Perhaps this is why we find so little to say. We suffer an odd brand of stage fright, I think, before all those dreadful eyes. Maybe that's what my uncle had noticed about Mr. Simpson on the lawn that night of the fight. Maybe in my eyes, a child's eyes, it was just the three of us squatting in the grass. But to those two men, the lawn appeared to be full of bodies, full of the people they'd made mistakes with in life, now tethered to them and ill-rested and serving no purpose but to remind them of the one awful thing, that life is made up, ever increasingly, of what you cannot change. One man's daughter, another man's wife, the song plays on. Yet all I know for sure is that 2 days after this fight on the lawn, our telephone rang. It was Lindy.
And that's why I like him. He's got a lot of wisdom there. And talk about Uncle Barry a little bit more.
Yeah, I think I became interested in that character. You know, I didn't particularly have anyone, anyone like that in my life per se, but I was interested in that character and I guess in the way that many people who don't seem like they would be, role models or kind of guideposts for you. When you look back at your life, they really were. And he was just one of those characters I thought would be, a welcome addition to this narrator's life. Who, like you said, his dad left, and his dad is, kind of cursorily doing some duties, but it usually doesn't go that well when dad tries to get involved. And then Uncle Barry enters their life due to a tragedy that they've had in their family, and next thing you know, he and the narrator are hitting it off. I think part of the reason is, I'm sure it's with women the same way. I don't know, but I know with men, the kind of father and son dynamic, there's so much kind of pressure on it. And when someone can kind of slide in on the side, say it be a friend of the family or an uncle, and there's not that immediate pressure on the father-son relationship, and I'm teaching you and you're learning and all that type of stuff, things can actually get accomplished,
Yeah. One of the other parts or one of the other things in the book that after I read it, I kept thinking of it as a kind of character and that's the high school that they all go to,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it shapes the way people act and how they talk and what they consider important. So to me, it was a kind of character. Hey, we can fight that out on the next segment. We will return shortly.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
M.O. Walsh is with us here today on Conversations on the Coast to talk about his debut novel, My Sunshine Away, published by G.P. Putnam Sons. And somewhere we have a quote from somebody who's terribly important. Ah, yes, the wonderful Anne Rice. Anne Rice. Is she living back in your part of the world now?
No, I believe she's still in California.
Okay, that's what I thought, too. She says, I really love this book. I can't praise it enough. My Sunshine Away is not a thriller. It is not genre fiction, but its realism it's realism at its finest, and it is a page-turner. A story made memorable in paragraph after paragraph. Such a beautiful book. Such a remarkable book. We can't get away from detailing things without getting you to talk about the parents of the narrator. We have a Catherine and Glenn, and they're, as I said before, they're separated on the way to divorce, as most of the book takes place, and yet they remain parenting, it seems to me. Is that the way you saw them?
They remain what? What was the word?
They're continuing to parent, to be parents,
right?
Even though they're growing apart or have grown apart.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think they definitely have a different skill set when it comes to their their parenting.
Yes,
but the mom is always there and constantly. I think a quiet kind of force in the narrator's life. The dad is rarely there and is usually quite loud when he shows up. So they're definitely different in that way. I think the mom is always conscious of the fact that she feels her job right now is to try to parent through the many different tragedies that are happening within their own family, within her own personal life, and then within their community. The mom is well aware of the fact that her son, the narrator, is obsessed with the girl who was attacked, and so much to the fact that he's kind of a suspect in this crime. So she's got that weighing on her, along with several other things. But she is, I think, kind of always trying to parent through it. The dad, it seems like, took an opportunity to kind of clap out of the family situation and go be with the girl much younger than him, who I think he's love. I mean, eventually comes to love, but at the same time, you don't see it that way when you're a teenager and your dad runs off. But yeah, they both try. The mom calls dad back to work every once in a while when she realizes things are maybe going awry with their son, and so they both give it a whirl.
And there's one point in the book, unless I'm not remembering it correctly, when the narrator has to admit, at least to the reader, if not to anybody else, that he really loves his father, even though his father, quote, walked out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that he, there's a part in the book that, at least to me, is trying to talk about the fact that, children and, teenagers going into adults have to get past some of these things. If every, it says something to the effect that, if every, child who'd been hurt by, their father walking out, could get revenge, there'd be no, men above 50 left on earth, You
got a point there.
And there's got to come a time where you try to understand it, from an adult point of view, and try to move forward. And so I think that what the narrator does is, what the narrator hopefully in this book has the ability to do. It's what we all have the ability to do. We don't always do, which is look back at ourselves when we were teenagers with the sort of ability now to understand what we did that was perhaps just uninformed, what we did that was perhaps dangerous at the time, what we did that was perhaps embarrassing or laughable, and those are all the things that teenagers can't do in the moment. They can't separate their actions. They can't look at themselves from a distance yet. They just don't. I don't think they have that cognitive ability really. But now when you look back at yourself, you're like, okay, well, that was something I did that was unfortunate, but it wasn't dangerous. That was something I did that was unfortunate, and that's kind of funny and embarrassing. And so now the narrator can look back at he and his father's relationship,
right.
And kind of, shuffle through some of the things that were hurtful then and still hurtful, but understand that there's a larger picture too. And I think what you're referencing is that, he comes to understand in the larger picture that the father does love him and did love him. But the father was, his own unique individual and made choices that, affected their family. But it's the father's life that he was living.
Right. One of the things My Sunshine Away is a mystery story, and I'd like you to share a good piece of the denouement with us. We know where it starts. We discussed this. And if you could set it up and read it through.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I don't want to give too much away, but, like you said, much of the book is the narrator, admitting that there were 4 kind of known suspects to this rape, and no one was ever arrested. And he's kind of going back through his memory and trying to kind of figure out who it was, and talking about what he did as a teenager to try to figure out who it was, so he could give this information to Lindy if he came across it.
Yeah.
And this is a moment in the book when he has broken into someone's house who's they've long suspected of being kind of a dark force in the neighborhood, and
correct.
A huge man by the name of Jacques Landry. And the moment I'm going to read here is after he's broken into the house, the police show up. His father and the narrator's father has unexpectedly shown up on the street and is confronting Mr. Landry. So the narrator looks out. He's still inside the house that he's broken into. Looks outside the window and sees his father kind of standing up to this very, very large
right. Okay.
Man who the father. Yeah. And hereabout came a change in me. Although it was dark outside and the lighting was bad, just a few rotating sirens, 2 street lights lit, and a third still broken, it looked like my father was invincible. If you could have frozen that moment in time like we often do in our photos, you would have seen my father about to reach into the throat of Jacques Landry and pull out his bullying heart. You would also see genuine fear in Mr. Landry's broad face. More important, though, and what I'm trying to tell you, is that within this quick exchange, I understood that it is inside all of us men to be both menacing and cowardly. It is in all of us to have virtue and value, and yet it is also in our power to fall into irrelevant novelty, or even worse, elicit indifference from the people that we've loved. This is the challenge, I suppose, of fatherhood. And so I knew that, despite my father's errors, he loved me. He loved us. I also knew that big and important parts of him were sorry, because I knew that he was willing to fight. What more could I ask for? I will never apologize for loving him back. But it was my mother's face that brought me out of the window. She stood to the side of the growing crowd as confusion in general began to bloom. She watched my father argue with Mr. Landry, but I could tell by her expression that she was not listening to them. My mother, instead, was in some internal place, looking around at her life. I wondered what she was thinking then, in the same way I so often wonder that now. Was she considering her time with my father? Was she wondering how it had come to this? What is the exact path from old wedding photos to a night of horror outside of your dream house? What are the odds of one child dead and another one missing? The truth is, of course, there are no odds for this, and that is when I realized what my mother must have been doing. She must have been preparing herself. That's why, when everyone else was yelling and getting emotional, my mother stood quietly off to the side as if doing math in her head. And me, I wanted to solve her problem. So I lifted the curtain and stepped outside of the Landry's house.
And there's a phrase in there that really says it all in a way. That how did we get from old wedding photos to a night of horror outside of your dream house? And that's life. It happens so many times, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to connect the dots, really directly between them. I think it's one of the difficult things in life to do is try to figure out how you got here when that was never the plan, and when you had done everything that you thought you were doing the right thing over and over and over, and it ends up with an unexpected result. This
book took you 7 years, as I recall, to put it together all the way.
Yeah, from start to finish, it was about 7 years. I had my wife and I had 2 children of our own during this process, and so I think that was part of it. A couple of lovely interruptions, but at the same time, it's also just I just work kind of slowly. I think I'm just not a speedy guy.
Don't apologize. It's a very, very fine book. It is called My Sunshine Away, a novel by M.O. Walsh, and this has been Conversation on the Coast. I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.